Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to talk all about how to equip your Cataphractii Terminators. Probably a video I should have done much earlier, given how many problems people seem to have with getting this unit to work, but I think this is going to be really good, really help you make those units do good stuff on the tabletop. We're going to go through the strengths and weaknesses of the unit, all of the different equipment options and transport options for the unit as well, some tactics for how to get the most out of them on the tabletop, general guidance for creating your loadouts, and also some recommended loadouts from me that you can't really go wrong with. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and a subscribe on YouTube, and don't forget to leave me any comments down below. You can also join our Discord community as well, which is linked in the video description. And now, on with the show. The strengths of Cataphractii Terminators are, well, there's a few. Primarily that they're tough. Terminator armor is very hard to kill things in. 2+ native save, which means that most weapons you will get a 2+ against, which is just a huge damage reduction. You know, even shooting something with lots and lots of weapons will often not do a lot. And if you can penetrate that, they've got a 4+ invulnerable as well. It's just massive. On top of that, they got heavy, so if you do try to hit them with a template, they're going to get to re-roll that 2+ unless it's got very high penetration as well. They're also harder than average to break and pin, so they've got inexorable, which means they ignore some of the modifiers to being broken or pinning, so not those that come from fear, but others as well. So they're slightly harder than average. They're not actually that expensive at the base cost, so 175 points for 10 wounds of Space Marines with that armor isn't actually too bad for what it does. They can also be quite flexible in their preferred targets due to how flexible their melee loadouts are, so you can set them up to fight things with a 2+ save, or enemy Space Marines, or to kill vehicles. And also as well, they do get line in Pride of the Legion, so we're not going to talk about that much in this video, but if you are using Pride of the Legion, Cataphractii Terminators, because they're tough and reasonably costed, and are also scoring in that situation too, become super valuable, and just great at sitting on an objective and holding it. But they're certainly not without their weaknesses as well. They do get expensive if you kit them out with, you know, lots of the different cool options they can take. You know, lots of their equipment, like things like Thunderhammers or their guns, adds up quickly. And this is probably the number one way I see people sort of fail this unit, is like they bring it, spend a ton of points on it, and it just doesn't do enough for the points they spend. So we're going to talk about that quite a lot. They are slow when they're on foot. They only move 6. They can't run because they're heavy, so they're not going anywhere quickly. Elite slots, which they come in if you're not playing Pride of the Legion, can be limited sometimes as well. So, you know, you've got Dreadnoughts, you've got lots of Legion-specific units that go in the elite slot. You've got other cool stuff like Rapiers as well, so they can be in contention for that. They're primarily a melee-focused unit, but they're only weapon skill 4. That's one of the biggest disadvantages. No matter how many cool weapons you give them, they are only weapon skill 4, and when they come up against weapon skill 5 units, they're really going to struggle, so we need to bear that in mind when we're using them. Now, while they do have some good shooting weapon options, like the Plasma Blaster, or the Reaper Autocannon, and the Heavy Flamer are all pretty decent, you can't take enough of them, is an issue. So there's not really a point putting one Plasma Blaster in a unit or one Reaper Autocannon. You can't capitalize on that. And what you end up with is mixed weapons as well. So if you have a Plasma Blaster, which you want to shoot at, you know, stuff with a good armor save, it's all well and good having your one Plasma Blaster, but all the bolters in the unit are then going to do nothing against the thing with the good armor save. So you waste a lot as well. So they're not really a good shooting unit, even though they have some cool shooting options. Talking of shooting options, let's have a look at them. So the Combi Bolter is the one they generally come with. Well, it keeps the unit cheap. The main reason to have the Combi Bolter, it doesn't really do a lot on the battlefield, especially since there's only a small number of guys in the unit. But just by not doing anything with that sort of gun slot, keep your unit nice and cheap, which is a big deal. Minor combi weapons, so these are quite underused and, you know, obviously a little bit harder to come by in terms of modelling. But I think Flamers are pretty good. You know, they're only 5 points per model, and it can do quite a lot of damage, you know, a whole unit of these with Flamers, and they're tough enough to get there to use them as well. They might get charged as well, so that's quite good, but their cost can add up quickly. 5 points per model for a Flamer, which is ultimately an anti-infantry weapon, can get expensive quite quickly, but if you want to use combi weapons, is definitely a decent option. The other good combi weapon option that I think gets overlooked quite a lot is the grenade launcher with frag grenades for the pinning option. You know, it's only a low strength, it's only a small blast template, but on average, if you've got 3 of these, assuming they all hit about 3 models, you'll force a pinning test. So for a fairly low cost investment of 15 points, you can make a unit that would normally just have some bolters, a unit that is capable of pinning things, and that's a pretty good investment. Obviously, it means you have to convert these, but we'll assume that's not a problem. But certainly a thing that doesn't get looked at very much that can give you Terminators a nice option there, especially if they're going to be charging into melee. You can maybe pin things first, etc. Magna Combi weapons, on the other hand, a little bit too expensive, and this goes for most units across the board. Magna Combi weapons are just too many points. 10 points for one plasma or one melter shot just isn't good enough in the game at the minute. Now, if you do like combi weapons though, and you think they're cool and you want to model them, the plasma or the melter options are, obviously the best. Your plasma ones, you're going to put them into some elites, hopefully, for one big shot that kills a bunch, or melter maybe into a vehicle for one big shot. But you also don't need to take lots of these, particularly melter. You could just take maybe 2 or 3 in the unit to keep the cost down, and that will be enough to have a good, one shot at blowing a vehicle up as well. But generally these, if you're looking to optimize the unit, are a bit too expensive. Volkite Chargers, similarly. Volkite Chargers are an okay weapon, and for only 2 points, they are a little buff above a combi bolter, but ultimately you're still just sort of like 5 guys, or even 10 guys. It's not really enough firepower to make a huge dent in anything, and the points do add up. Even though it's only 2 points per model, across 5 guys, that could be a power fist or something that's going to have a bigger impact. So, if you really want to model these, they're certainly not bad for their points, and certainly a thing you can do, but I would prefer to spend these points on something in melee instead. Looking at the bigger range weapon options, of which you can only take one, the Heavy Flamer is actually not bad as a 5-point upgrade. It's a close range unit anyway. It's only going to replace a bolter. 5 points for what a Heavy Flamer gives you is actually okay. And Heavy Flamers, as long as they're not hitting units with the heavy trait, can actually kill a couple of Space Marines, or if you do play against things like Ad Secularis, where they've got a big unit of squishy things, can actually, kill a lot of a unit quite easily. So Heavy Flame is certainly not a bad option, and it does make your unit look cool, put a bit of variation in it as well. Reaper autocannons are also pretty good, but they're a bit expensive, and ultimately it's just an autocannon, so it's a bit of a jack of all trades, really. Having one of them in a unit is unlikely to do anything or impact anything. So while these do look super cool, and again, you would not be wrong to put one in your unit. I've got one in one of my Terminator units just because they look cool. They're not very good. The Plasma Blaster as well, again, pretty good weapon. Plasma guns are pretty good, and it's on a tough Terminator who's going to be hard to kill, unlike Marines carrying plasma guns. But you've still got the problem you can only take one. It's not going to be an effective shooting unit. You really want to shoot it at targets that your bolters aren't going to hurt as well, so it kind of wastes potential bolter kills too. Just a little bit expensive, and again, outside of the cool factor, probably best avoided. Onto melee weapons. So Terminators come with power weapons, and this is one of their biggest strengths, I think. For a 175-point unit coming with them 5 cheap/free power weapons is great. The Power Axe is my favourite power weapon on most units. It's AP2, which is great. It's +1 strength, which normally means 1 better to wound than whatever else you would be using. And the only drawback is it's unwieldy, but Terminators are very tough, and they will generally be able to survive to Initiative 1. A lot of the time as well, you'll be fighting against other things that might be hitting at Initiative 1 if they're things that can hurt you. So, really you're just going at the same time as a lot of things. Power Axes are just good. They give you quite a good range to kill anything in the game that you're going to fight against. The other good option is the Power Mace. Now, the Power Mace is +2 strength, so it's wounding things on a 2, which is great, and it still goes through Marine armor. So if your primary target is going to be killing a bunch of Marines in melee with your Terminators, which again I do think is a completely fine thing for Terminators to aim to be able to do, because they're weapon skill 4, they don't necessarily want to be fighting enemy elites. It's also a really good weapon, a good power weapon. The Power Sword, I generally don't think as much of. It kills Marines okay, but it's only going to be strength 4, so you're still only going to wound them half the time. Gives you a small chance of hitting high save, or, if you're fighting against things with a low initiative, you can go through their saves before they attack, unlike the Power Axe. But really, that's going to be such a small number of attacks that do that, and it means that your strength versus other things like Marines isn't very good. I don't really rate the Power Sword very well. I think you'd be better taking the Axe or the Mace for a specific type of target rather than the Power Sword, which does both type of targets kind of badly. And you sort of get the same with the Power Lance as well. It's kind of like the Mace. The +1 initiative is nice, but how often is that really going to be super important? Like things that are hitting you at initiative 4 that you're now going to go before are probably not the kind of things that are going to go through your armor anyway, so you're not super scared, and you really want to go before them as much as you would rather just have an extra strength from the power mace, which has got similar-ish stats. So power lance I also don't think is great. So generally power axe or power mace on these is great. These obviously don't come with the plastic kits, but it's a small number of models, not hard to source or kit bash some axes and maces. You can also get them from Forge World, particularly axes for Cataphractii as well. These will definitely make your Cataphractii better, and it keeps them cheap while still being effective. The Power Fist is a classic Terminator weapon. Now, unfortunately, because of the Thunderhammer and the Chain Fist just being so much better for 5 extra points, Power Fists aren't really very efficient. They don't really have much of a point. If you might as well take one of the other weapons for the small amount of extra points. But that said, the Power Fist is certainly not bad. It instant deaths everything that's a Space Marine. It goes through high armor. It's still a good weapon, and if you want to use them for aesthetics or for that classic Terminator look, or just because you've got them, you certainly can. When we follow some guidelines we're going to talk about later on, you can certainly make these work. Lightning Claws get a whole page to themselves. So Lightning Claws are one of the more common weapons I see on Cataphractii Terminators. Now, their niche is really killing Space Marines still, because they're AP3, they've got shred, so they're reliable wounding, while still maintaining some anti-elite capabilities with that rending as well. That's really what the niche is, and for that you pay 5 points. The problem with that is, over a power mace or a power axe, it's not that much better at killing, at what it does, than just taking one of those power weapons for 5 points. And I think this is one of the problems. They look so cool. People love putting them on their units. Every Cataphractii unit I see has loads of Lightning Claws, but you're spending 5 points for what's really like a very slight upgrade, and that's when they get a little bit expensive. Now, Dual Claws are good, because you get, obviously, bonus attacks, and because the Lightning Claw itself is quite good, the Dual Claws are quite good as well, so they are worth taking, and they are pretty decent. If your main target's enemy Marines, Double Claws, does increase your killing power over a power mace, but you do pay the 10 points for it. The problem with them is, because you got low weapon skill, and ultimately not that many attacks, even though you've got the Lightning Claw bonus, when you are fighting against 2+ save units, yes, you can go through their armor with rending, but you might be hitting them on a 5. A lot of the time, you haven't got that many attacks anyway. So, or even if you do go through their armor, you may be going to put 1 or 2 wounds on them, which isn't enough. And that's the problem with the anti-elite side of Lightning Claws, is that the Terminator himself isn't great at using them. So ultimately, Lightning Claws aren't a bad choice, but they're better in pairs. Either take a pair or don't take them. It's much more efficient to put a pair on one Terminator and have another Terminator with an axe or a mace than it is to put one Lightning Claw on each of 2 Terminators for the same points. And that's another, common mistake I see equipping these Cataphractii, because you're using what's in the box, understandably, but, it doesn't make them into quite as good a unit. And we've got the Chain Fist. I really like Chain Fist. They're good versus vehicles. Even just one guy with a Chain Fist in a unit can quite happily just explode a vehicle using that Armor Bane and that AP2. They're also not bad versus Dreadnoughts, because they do get to reroll their wound rolls. So you'll be wounding most Dreadnoughts on a 3 with a reroll, which is, acceptable. They're also completely fine versus elite targets. They're effectively just the same as a Power Fist. So, they will kill instant death things with toughness 4, go through their armor 2 as well. For 15 points, that's quite a bit of utility. And, putting 2 in a unit will mean most of the time, if you go into combat with a vehicle, you're going to kill it. Putting 1 in a unit has still got a good chance of killing a vehicle as well. So these are a good option. Thunderhammers, sort of similarly, they're the best melee weapon in the game, hands down, really. But generally, they're most powerful when you're hitting units with a 2+ save and toughness 4 that you can instant death, very expensive elites like Just Air and Terminators and stuff. That's when you really get your value out of Thunderhammers. And the problem for Cataphractii, therefore, is most of those units that Thunderhammers are best against are weapon skill 5 and your weapon skill 4. So you pay the same amount of points for a Thunderhammer as they do, but they're better in combat. And so really, the best targets for a Thunderhammer are things that you probably don't really want to be fighting, because they're going to just beat you in the combat a lot of the time. And, Thunderhammers do get expensive when you take them in multiples. So the best way to use these in Cataphractii units for me is just maybe to take 1, put it on the Sergeant, because he's got an extra base attack. And it means that if you do end up in combat with an elite unit, or just, in a Space Marine unit with an Apothecary or a Dreadnought or something a bit tougher, you have got that one guy with the extra attack to add a bit of extra punch without spending too many points on lots of Thunderhammers. Other options, the equipment that you can take. So you can take a Vexillor, not a bad buy if you expect to fight, combats where you might need that extra +1. The break-in part of this is like a nice to have, but really you take it for the +1 combat result. But it does add to your unit cost. And again, remember that's 5 points off being a Thunderhammer instead. You're often going to be aiming for softer targets with Terminators, I think, where you don't need this. If you've got a unit with power maces and all they're going to do is kill Marines in power armor, you don't really need the +1 combat bonus. And if you're fighting against elites, they're probably going to beat you anyway. So I don't think that this actually comes into play a lot. So I'd probably skip it. Similarly for the Augury Scanner, your shooting's not good enough to really make it worthwhile. Nuncio Vox. This unit's actually quite a good choice for like the Vox carrier in your army because it's obviously tough to kill. And a lot of the time people will just avoid killing it. So obviously the Nuncio Vox doesn't help if you're in a transport like a Land Raider or something. But if you're just starting on the board, walking around denying objectives, this is a really good choice for a Vox carrying unit in your army. And then lastly, the Grenade Harness. So it's a little bit niche, still fighting at full initiative. And if you've got a unit full of power axes or something like that, or chain fist and unwieldy weapons, this doesn't actually do anything. But if you have got a unit that's using power weapons and things that want to strike at full initiative, this is not actually a terrible use of 5 points. There's enough terrain around and, grav weapons and that kind of things that will make you fight at initiative 1, that throwing 5 points onto your Terminator unit to make it fight at full initiative, if it charges through that, is actually not bad. It's one of them things you do with the last few spare points left over in your army, maybe. For transport options, you can take a Land Raider Proteus. A Land Raider Proteus is just a great unit. For 220 points, it's got a lot of las cannons, it's tough, it's a good tank, and you don't need to transport things in a Proteus to make it good, which is something I'll talk about when I review that unit in another video. But, if you have got Terminators that want to get transported, you get an extra value out of taking a Proteus, and it's not using up heavy support slot as well. So any Cataphractii loadout that you use that I'm going to talk about at all will always benefit from a Land Raider Proteus, and particularly if you've got a more expensive unit that you really want to get into combat, definitely worth taking. Spartans, sort of similar. Now, Spartans are a much more expensive unit that are a lot less good for its cost in combat than the Proteus is, but for units of a certain size, they are the only option to get them into combat. Now, generally, I would reserve spending, all the points on a Spartan for super elite units you need to deliver, and not for your Cataphractii that aren't super elite. So I would probably avoid them with this unit, because that's one of the ways you spend too many points on your Cataphractii, basically, is you buy them a big Spartan. It's just too many points all in one place. Go with the Proteus instead. You can also use a Dreadclaw drop pod. They're quite pricey. They only transport 6 Terminators. They are also better left to be used by more elite units, really. You can absolutely use them. Would be cool dropping one down. And in some armies you will if you've got that theme going on. But for the most part, not a great choice for Cataphractii units. So with all those weapon options and equipment options in mind, let's talk tactics. How do you use the Cataphractii? Well, they are very tough for their points, and that's the main strength. 175 points for a unit with a 2+ and a 4+ invulnerable is great. Lots of units just can't deal with that. And a great use of Cataphractii is to bully those units, right? If your opponent's got a unit of tactical marines in a Rhino and he's going to try and take a midfield objective with it, 5 Cataphractii are only 40 points more expensive than that unit, and they will win the fight every time against 10 tactical marines. They won't be able to shoot you, and you'll murder them in combat with your power weapons. Bullying units that can't hurt the Terminator armor is the best thing that Cataphractii can do. They are best when the primary combat focus is melee. Don't try to make them a shooting unit, they're not one. We talked about that a little bit, make them a melee unit. But notably, they're not an elite combat unit. They're weapon skill 4, they got a low number of attacks ultimately, they don't have any special rules or anything like that. So don't kit them out like an elite combat unit, and this is one of the biggest mistakes I see people making, equipping these units, taking loads of expensive melee weapons, Thunderhammers, Chain Fist, Dual Lightning Claws on the whole unit, making it a unit of 10. You get this big unit that's actually just not that strong in combat. And once you put so many points into it, it's suddenly worth your opponent investing time in killing it as well. Your unit that was very tough and efficient for its points is now very tough but much less efficient for its points because all the models in it are worth 15, 20 points more because you've kitted them out. So don't try to fight enemy elite units with these. As I said, bully things that can't really hurt them well. But you can use them to tie up enemy elite combat units. Again, if you've not made the unit too expensive and it's just 175 points of guys with a really good save, you can definitely tie up enemy elite units. You know, when them 400 points worth of Justarian comes in and it takes them, you know, maybe 2, even 3 turns, potentially if they get a bit unlucky to kill your 5 Terminators because they pass some saves and they're inexorable so they don't run away, you've really got a lot of value out of them. That's one good way to use them. And in Pride of the Legion, as I mentioned before, fantastic objective sitter, significantly more valuable, which actually changes, you know, a lot of this, really, because they have a role other than denying at that point. But before we go on to my recommended loadouts, here's some general loadout guidance, because you can equip these in a whole lot of different ways, and you definitely should because they look cool. Keep them cheap. Investing too many points makes these need to be the star of your show. You know, when you've got 10 of these fully kitted out and a Spartan, it's 1,000 points. They have to win you the game, and they're not that type of unit. They don't have the weapon skill, they don't have the damage output. You know, they're not really powerful enough to do that. Not every model's got to be identically equipped either. So one of the best ways you can keep these cheap while still making them effective is kit some of the models up. You know, you get your 1 Thunderhammer, your 1 Chain Fist, and then a bunch of guys with power weapons who can all die first. You know, that's a classic way of making units effective without making them too expensive, and that really helps these perform. Don't make the unit too large either, because again, they become much more worth your opponent investing like an elite unit or a lot of firepower and killing them. I think around 5-6 is a fine unit size for these. Plenty enough. And it means your opponent has to deal with them or ignore them, but it's not really worth investing a lot of their resources in killing when they're only, you know, a 200-point unit. Don't try to do too many things at once with them. So they are flexible, and it is tempting to give them like every weapon, you know, just another 5 points, just another 15 points. You know, you give them the grenade launchers for pinning, and you give them some lightning claws and a Thunderhammer and Chain Fist, but all of a sudden, again, you've broken that rule, you've made them too expensive. I would aim for maximum 2, maybe 3 upgraded Terminators in every 5. So, you know, you maybe have your 2 guys with Chain Fists and then 3 guys with power weapons. You know, that's only a 205-point unit. It's good against a variety of targets, but it's not super expensive if your opponent decides to kill it. Now, here's some loadouts I would recommend. These are quite optimized. You know, these are not the only things you can play, but these are quite optimized. So I'm at 5 or 6 Terminators, combi bolters and power weapons, a basic unit, effectively. You know, 205 points if you take 6 guys. It's tough, it's cheap. It can block space on the board, it can deny objectives, it can bully enemy units that have got weapons that can't kill it very well. It can tie up enemy units. It can just murder anything in power armor, you know, special weapon squads, tactical squads, some elite Legion-specific units that have only got 3+ saves, or 2+ saves if you take the power axe option. Axes and maces are both great on these. Power axes are good versus everything. And, you know, if you do fight things that are weapon skill 4 but have got a 2+ save, things like pyroclasts, for example, you know, these are great at killing them. Or power maces if you just want to focus on, you know, ignore the 2+ save targets, kill them with something else in your army. Focus on being the best at killing Space Marines. And a good thing to throw in on these as well is that little 3 grenade launcher combi option, or just a heavy flamer. You know, we're all about keeping the unit cheap, making it unattractive to shoot, and just having it do its thing by being a hard-to-kill block of guys with power weapons. Now, going one up from this, so this is where we kit the unit out a little bit more, but not too much. So we're going to take 6 Terminators. We're going to give them power axes, because we're going to take some heavy melee weapons in this as well, so we want them all to be good at fighting the same target, you know, potentially things with a 2+ save. 1 Thunderhammer on the Sergeant, as I mentioned before, just to give us that extra kill and power. 2 Chain Fists in the unit, which means we can kill vehicles, we can kill dreadnoughts, and we're fine against elites. We can penetrate their armor, even if they may be better weapon skill than us. And we've got 1 extra Terminator in there as well, because that means we've got 3 guys who are kitted out and 3 guys who have just got power weapons who can die first as well. And if you're going to put something in a Land Raider, this is a good candidate. You know, a Land Raider can carry us into the battle. They're a bit more expensive at 250 points, not too expensive, but they're worth actually delivering potentially to do something. And this is a good sort of way, you know, sort of points value to aim for. 250 points is enough to spend on 6 Terminators. So if you're going to do a unit that's got a bit of mixed weaponry in it, or you want to make it look a bit cooler, this is the kind of area you want to aim for, and then you can put them in a Land Raider too. And lastly, the Lightning Claw loadout. So this isn't quite as ideal for me, but, you know, there's lots of Lightning Claws in the boxes, and they are a good weapon if you use them properly, and this is the kind of way I would use them. So you take 6 guys, we're going to give 3 of them dual Lightning Claws, and then we're going to let the other 3 have power maces as well. This is a lot of attacks against 3+ save units, and if you play against things like 20 tactical marines, 6 of these getting into 20 tactical marines will carve them up. You've got all those extra lightning claw attacks, you've got all those power maces, you're just going to murder them. And even if you do lose, because a lot of the power is concentrated in them lightning claw guys, if you do lose a couple to shooting before they get into combat, you've still got most of the unit's power left alive as well. And if you want to run your Terminators from the box with like a minimal amount of conversion just to get some power maces on the unit, or even power axes would work just fine as well, but maces would be a bit better. This is a good way to do it. So in summary, for the people who are struggling to use Cataphractii Terminators or make them feel like they're doing stuff for your army, they're a very tough unit, and their best use is to bully less tough units that can't hurt them easily. Don't make them fight elites. Make them bully other things that can't get through the Terminator armor. They're very flexible and they can play lots of different roles. Don't try to do them all at once. Do keep the unit cost reasonable, otherwise they do become, a little bit more disappointing and a little bit, less effective for their cost. They can be quite efficient and even competitive if you keep to some of these sort of more optimal loadouts, which generally involves more power weapons and less upgrades. They can be equipped with cool looking loadouts as well, though, and fairly effective. Again, it's all about not overspending on them. Have some power weapons, mix in some good weapons, let the power weapons die first, keep some of the combat potential of your unit alive for longer for less cost. And that's the end of the show. I hope it helped, particularly for the people who are struggling to get value out of the Cataphractii Terminators. If you enjoyed the show, please do like and subscribe, and please do leave me some feedback in the comments in YouTube as well if you've got any thoughts of your own. Don't forget to join us on the Heresy Discord community as well. That's linked in the video description below. See you all soon, guys. Bye-bye.